All right, for everybody standing by, we are waiting for our people on the ground down at Cape Canaveral to spool up the camera. We've got Chris Gebhardt, who's going to be near Slick 41, getting us some live views and talking about the Starliner that's there on that United Launch Alliance pad. Now, this is an unscheduled bit of a media stop, sort of an opportunity that arose because of the earlier scrub that occurred, so I am not currently exactly sure where they'll be, but we are standing by for that video signal. Again, give us just a minute as we spool up our remote camera from Cape Canaveral SLC-41. Again, if you're just joining us here, we are standing by for Chris Gebhardt down at Cape Canaveral to set up a camera and give us a live feed while he talks about Starliner. And they're actually traveling over to Starliner. Again, this was sort of a bit of a bonus stream that's coming through here, so we don't have an exact time as to when that camera will be online. Last information I have is that they were getting ready to arrive at the site, and that was just a couple minutes ago, so I imagine there's tripods being pulled out of buses right now as we wait for Chris Gebhardt to give us a live feed from SLC-41. I'm DOS, I'm just talking. I mean, I can answer questions in chat and stuff, but mostly I just mute the mic and wait for the other camera to come on. And I just got confirmation from Chris that he is ready to go, so we're going to try to spool up this camera. Give me just a few more seconds here, and let's see what we get. But I just got confirmation we are going to turn the live stream camera on. And there we go. It looks like we've got that live feed from the Cape. So I'm going to turn it over to Chris Gebhardt, who is on site next to the ULA. I mean, it says right there on the tin. It says ULA really big on the arm there. I'm just going to turn it over to Chris. Let's do that.
And good afternoon, folks, and welcome to our surprise and totally unplanned trip to Space Launch Complex 41, where we are looking at the Atlas V rocket with the Starliner crew vehicle on top. This is super exciting. Atlas V rolled out yesterday to the pad ahead of its wet dress rehearsal, which is currently scheduled for around the 6th of December. They have actually already loaded all of the RP1 kerosene into the Atlas booster. That is the gold booster at the bottom of the rocket. And when they get into their wet dress rehearsal, they will then load the liquid hydrogen and liquid oxygen into the Centaur upper stage and the liquid oxygen into the Atlas booster itself. So you can see the Starliner up top, and we're going to do a quick tour down the rocket because this is a very different configuration of the Atlas V. And if you've got any questions, throw them up into the chat, and Das, who is producing this on the back end, will get them over to me so we can make sure to answer as many as you've got. So definitely, if you've got the questions, put them in chat so we can get them answered. So until then, let's take a tour of Atlas. All right, so over to the left, you can see a rather large white structure centered in your frame there. That is the crew access arm. So this tower over to the left of the rocket is where the crew will be taken, and they will take the elevator up, and then they will walk across that arm and they will board the Starliner. Now the Starliner capsule where the crew will live is centered into your frame there. It is the gray capsule up at the top. And immediately below that is its service module. So that has all of the thrusters and engines and everything that it needs to complete its orbit insertion and rendezvous with the International Space Station. Now, an interesting thing about Starliner, as opposed to the Crew Dragon, is that Starliner will actually be inserted into a suborbital trajectory. So it will not be orbital when it separates from the top of the Centaur rocket, and it will use its OMAC engines, or orbital maneuvering and attitude control thrusters and engines, to finish the orbit insertion shortly thereafter. This is very similar to how the space shuttle used to get to orbit, where it wasn't quite orbital by the time it separated from its large fuel tank. Directly below that, and this is the first question we had in chat, is the aerodynamic aeroskirt. So Starliner is about 5 meters in diameter, which is a lot bigger than the payloads that normally sit atop the Centaur. And because it doesn't have a payload fairing, they had to design an aeroskirt to help mitigate some of the aerodynamic turbulence that could have posed a problem for the Atlas V during launch. So that aeroskirt will separate during the launch phase after the main booster has separated and they are on the dual engine Centaur. And speaking of the dual engine Centaur, that is it. That large white cylinder, the second stage, which will do a great deal of the work in terms of getting Starliner into its suborbital orbit. There you can see the inner stage where the dual engine Centaur engines will come down, and then we have the large gold first stage. And that brings us to the boosters. And you might notice something a little bit weird about them. They don't have nose cones on them right now. That is because the nose cones are not necessary for the wet dress rehearsal. They will be added and stacked on top of the boosters later in the processing flow, and they will certainly be present for launch. So as we keep coming down, you can see the pad base there, and let's go ahead and zoom us back out so you can see the whole rocket there on the pad. That's a nice wide shot to give you a sense of some scale. And we'll come back in. So again, if you've got questions, throw them into the chat, folks. We're here to answer them. So first question was about the aerodynamics, that it doesn't look very aerodynamic. It is actually aerodynamic, even though it doesn't have its payload fairing. The top of the Starliner itself is conical, so it will provide a very smooth cut through the dense lower atmosphere, but that aeroskirt, as we were just talking about, is to help with some of the aerodynamics further down the rocket as it ascends towards space. And a good question here, why do they use the dual engine Centaur instead of the single engine Centaur? So Starliner is a very, very heavy payload, and even with the twin solid rocket boosters down at the bottom, they need the extra performance and the extra kick that that second engine gives them, as opposed to just a single engine Centaur. It also provides for some redundancy in the system. If there was ever an incident during launch where they lost one of those second stage engines, they'd still have another one, and they could still nominally make it into a suborbital trajectory that is recoverable by the Starliner's thrusters. So there were a lot of good advantages to using the dual engine Centaur instead of the single engine Centaur. And there's been a lot said about the dual engine Centaur configuration. There's a lot of misinformation out there that it has never flown before, and that is not true. It has flown 123 times on an Atlas and 23 times, if I'm not mistaken, on a Delta. So it has flown hundreds of times. It is a well-known and well-proven upper stage. So when you hear that it hasn't flown before, don't buy it. It definitely has. Another question we have here is, do we expect any new cool aero effects from the skirt at max Q? An excellent question that we really don't know the answer to. We're going to have to wait and see. One of the cool things about the launch date and time right now of 6:59 a.m. Eastern time on the 19th of December is that that is just before sunrise on the ground. So the rocket will actually ascend into daylight. It should do its epic oops, hit the camera. It should do its epic plume and jellyfish in the sky, especially when it gets onto that dual engine Centaur upper stage. But it should be good lighting for us to actually see the aero effects and the aerodynamic effects of what that will look like as it heads through max Q. It's a great question there. Are these the GEM 63s or are they the AJ60 SRBs? As you can tell, some of us are on a road, so we have to be told when there's a car coming. These are still the Aerojet, the AJ60 solid rocket boosters. They did not make the switch yet to them, and they're still going through the process of certifying the GEM 63s from Northrop Grumman, which will eventually take over as the solid rockets on the Atlas V. But for now, these are the AJ60s. Does the rigid structure move out of the way at launch? So the rigid structure, the big gray tower that has umbilical piping and everything going into the rocket. Here, let me zoom in. So the big tower that says ULA, right, that has all of those lines going from it into the rocket, that will not move away during launch. Neither will the other large tower there to its left. That will stay static. The only thing that will move out of the way is the crew access arm, and that swings out of the way and gives all the clearances necessary for the Atlas to successfully clear the pad and get away safely. How have Boeing and ULA entered? Oh, have Boeing and ULA entered this capsule? It's a great question. They moved the crew access arm over yesterday after it rolled out to the pad, but we haven't seen any tweet or any notification that officials have actually opened Starliner's side hatch and gone inside of it yet. Great question. We'll let you know. Will this dock to the International Space Station? Yes, it most certainly will. So a launch on the 19th would result in a one-day phase up to the International Space Station for a docking on the 20th of December. Starliner would stay there for 4 to 5 days, so undocking on Christmas Eve or Christmas Day on the 24th or the 25th of December, and coming home shortly thereafter. So a very short test flight, just like the Crew Dragon did a very short test flight. Starliner is going to do a very short initial uncrewed test flight before the crew test flight later next year. So if you've got questions, keep throwing them in there. We've got a few more minutes. We actually have 13 more minutes. We've been told that 3 o'clock Eastern is when we will have to leave. So if you've got questions, keep them coming. Another one, how does the crew escape in case of an emergency? Very good question. So if there's an emergency on the launch pad, after that crew access arm swings away, it would be a pad abort where Starliner would fire its launch abort engines, and the capsule and the service module would pull away from the top of the Atlas and land about a kilometer or so away to the east in the Atlantic Ocean. If it is an emergency on the pad, but that access arm is still there, you can kind of see it. So there, it's on the other side of the tower, but basically the crew would exit the capsule and go across that crew walkway to the tower, and then there are zip lines that they would get into these harnesses and baskets, and they would zip line down to safety. You can kind of see those zip lines there behind the rocket. It's a little hard to focus on, but you can kind of see them there coming out and of the gold part of the rocket there, and angling down to the bottom right hand side of your screen. So that's how the crew working at the pad or the crew on board for launch would escape in the event of an emergency on the pad. Next question in there is, have they done an in-flight abort test yet? That's an excellent question. So neither provider, neither Boeing nor SpaceX, was required by NASA's Commercial Crew Program to do an in-flight abort. NASA said that they could certify the in-flight abort modes by computer analysis and computer modeling only. SpaceX opted to add that, so that's the in-flight abort that they're coming up with, and Boeing worked with NASA to certify in-flight abort through that computer-based modeling. So there will be no in-flight abort test for the Starliner, and that is perfectly within the rules and the boundaries and all the sort of benchmarks that NASA's Commercial Crew Program set. So that's a very important thing to remember, is NASA did not mandate an in-flight abort test as part of the overall certification for the Commercial Crew Program. And Boeing does not plan to do one, but rather certify via computer analysis and computer modeling. So if you've got questions, come on, keep throwing them in there. DOS is relaying them to me. But again, you know, we want to thank NASA, we want to thank Boeing especially for putting together and helping to organize this impromptu trip to the pad. When we started the day, we did not think we were going to be able to get to see the Atlas and bring you this, but thankfully everything aligned and they were all able to work it out. So the next question is, how will ULA name this Atlas? They have the 411, the 551, etc. So this Atlas is called the N22. The N stands for no payload fairing. The first 2 stands for 2 solid rocket boosters, and the second 2 stands for 2 engine Centaur upper stage. So the N, the letter N is in Nancy, N22 is what this Atlas is called. Can you zoom in on the missing SRB nose cones? I certainly can. Give me 1 second here. And there you go. So you can see they've got some, they've got protective tape and protective coverings over them just to protect them environmentally and everything like that. But that's what they look like without their nose cones on. Very, very weird looking configuration here, to a very unique configuration Atlas as well. Any information on the test flight dummy? Is it in the rocket? And they're referring to Rosie, the test flight dummy that Boeing said will be on this mission. It's a great question. We don't actually know if that is on board yet. I wouldn't even want to venture a guess, but you know, I will say, you know, we're at the 4th of December, the launch is on the 19th. You know, after its wet dress rehearsal, Atlas will actually roll back to the vertical integration facility behind me, and it'll have its SRB nose caps installed, it'll undergo final processing, and then roll back out for launch. So this isn't the only opportunity they have to get something into the capsule. They'll have other opportunities later on when it returns to the pad for its actual launch. Are there some sort of black grid fins, those things around the top? Can I zoom back in? Are you referring to the, let's see what you're referring to. Is that question referring to the SRBs, the top of the SRBs right there? Or something further back up the rocket? There are no grid fins on the Atlas. There are no grid fins on Starliner or anything like that. But let's pan up here, because there are some other black areas that we may be thinking about. So what you're seeing on the Starliner there, and sun angles are creating some interesting shadows here now, but so on the gray Starliner capsule, the conical capsule there, you see some black areas. Those are thermal protection system tiles. Those same black thermal protection system tiles that flew with the space shuttle for 30 years are part of Starliner's thermal protection system as well. So that might be what you're seeing. On the service module there, there's also a mesh ring that goes around it. That's also for some forms of aerodynamic stability and stuff like that, but no grid fins or anything like that. So again, if you got questions, we're here for another 6 minutes or so. This is it's a great opportunity to see the Atlas, guys. And again, like, I really can't say how great it is that directly behind me is the Cargo Dragon from SpaceX on its launch pad, while Starliner is on this pad. It's a great thing to see at Cape Canaveral. Three different providers, United Launch Alliance, Boeing, and SpaceX, all having commercial vehicles for NASA and the International Space Station out here. This is something that has been a long time coming, and a huge milestone, and the fact that they're overlapping, the visual here is just absolutely amazing. And United Launch Alliance even has their Delta Heavy rocket on pad 37B right now, preparing for its mission mid next year. So 3 rockets on 3 pads at Cape Canaveral is a wonderful sight to see again. Another good question, when is this launching? This particular vehicle is slated to launch no earlier than the 19th of December at 6:59 in the morning Eastern time, which is just about 15 minutes before sunrise here local time. So should be a gorgeous launch if it holds to that day. And again, that would be launching for Starliner to dock to the International Space Station a day later on the 20th, stay until about the 24th or 25th, and then undock and come back home to complete its uncrewed orbital flight test. So lots of good questions. If you've got them, keep them coming. It's exciting, guys. It's super exciting to see all of this really coming to fruition, and all of Boeing and ULA's hard work to get Starliner and the Atlas V ready for these missions. It's going to be not this particular mission, but the crew test flight next year of Starliner will be the first time that the Atlas V carries people, but it's also heritage stretching all the way back to the beginning of the human space program, when the Atlases used to launch the Mercury capsules into orbit during the Mercury program in the early 60s. So tremendous connections here, and throwbacks to the beginning of the human spaceflight program in the United States. I believe it was United Launch Alliance that built the that primarily designed and built the aeroskirt, but I will check on that. That's a good question of who exactly built the aeroskirt. I believe it's ULA, but I will check to make sure, because it's a little, you can't really see it all that well from the ground, but if you go back to United Launch Alliance's Twitter account, they have video of when they rolled the Centaur upper stage out to the pad, and it already had the aeroskirt attached. So the aeroskirt actually attaches to the Centaur upper stage. It does not attach to the bottom of the service module on Starliner, which is what it looks like when you just look at it here on the pad, but it's actually connected to the Centaur, not the Starliner. Can we zoom in on those interstage decals? We most certainly can. Lighting's a bit weird, but basically it's the American flag on the top, NASA's meatball logo in the middle, and United Launch Alliance on the bottom is what that says. Oh, and we do have an answer. Michael Baylor, thank you for the answer to this. ULA is the one that built the aeroskirt, not Boeing. So there is your answer to that. So again, just about 4 more minutes before we're gonna have to wrap it up and get back on the bus, guys. Thank you so much to all of you for joining today. A good question here, will the CRS-19 Dragon be at the International Space Station when Starliner arrives? And the answer is yes. If all of the launch dates hold and everything goes according to plan, Dragon will get to the International Space Station on Sunday, and Starliner will then arrive on the 20th of December. And They talked a little bit at the press conference yesterday that all the analyses have already been done to show that Starliner's thrusters will not impact Dragon while Dragon is berthed to the station as Starliner comes into dock. And since Dragon is grappled by the station arm for its release, there's likewise no there's no adverse effect on Starliner if Dragon should depart the space station while Starliner is still there. Right now, Starliner should depart first while Dragon's still there, but if that should flip for some reason, there is again no concern there. Now, what you can't see on this particular one is so Starliner is powered by solar arrays and solar cells that are actually mounted to the bottom of the service module. So that first white ring underneath the conical gray Starliner, so hidden from view is where all of those solar panels are. So after Starliner pops off the top of the Atlas, those solar panels will be exposed to the sun, and that's how this ship will generate power while on orbit. So that is going to be it for us here. Doss, if you want to take it away for the outro and then let me know when we're clear. Thank you all for joining, and here's to Starliner and Boeing and United Launch Alliance.
All right, y'all, and that is Chris G down at the Cape. Let's make sure all this is working correctly. Yes. All right, so again, thank you for joining us there. Just a little bit of a bonus stream. I call them bonus streams, right? But that was Chris G. They were at Slick41. On the screen right now, we actually have a photo that was just taken by Mike Deep, one of the NASA spaceflight photographers. And we actually got that over here and uploaded on the away screen, which is amazing. I'm surprised that worked. But again, that is Starliner up on top of its Atlas V rocket. That's United Launch Alliance, and that is Boeing. That is the part of the commercial crew taking humans back to space from U.S. soil for the first time in quite some time. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and we will see you next time. Don't forget to visit NASASpaceflight.com to keep up to date on all the latest news about everything that's going on with spaceflight. Somebody link that in chat.